Furnishings for this program provided by Van Tassel's Fireside Furniture and Clock Gallery, 5000 Kilgore, Muncie, Indiana.
Hello, welcome to Fall State Today. Topics on today's program include the use of behavioral medicine, the gifted child, and Sir Winston Churchill as remembered by his secretary. Dr. Patricia Wisocki, a Kirkpatrick Memorial Workshop speaker, talked to us about the use of behavioral medicine and teaching aphasics sign language. He spoke to the people attending the Kirkpatrick Memorial Workshop on Aging about behavioral medicine. What do you mean by behavioral medicine?
Well, behavioral medicine is a relatively new term. It originated in the mid-1970s that blends behavioral psychology and biomedical psychology or biomedical health specialties. It involves the application of psychological techniques and principles and research results to disease processes, to helping people maintain their health, to preventing health problems. It's something that hasn't been used much with the elderly. It's something that should be used with the elderly. But the reason I was presenting it today was because I wanted to introduce this particular population of elderly to the availability of those procedures.
In your research, are you using it with the elderly?
In my research right now, I'm investigating some of the worries that the elderly have, and the next step in that research will be the use of stress management procedures to deal with the kinds of concerns that they raise. Many of the worries that they have focus on health problems, in terms of things like being disabled, worrying about spouses that get disabled, worrying about caring for their spouses, the costs of health care, worried about losing their memory, worried about having to go into a nursing home and that kind of thing. Stress management procedures will come out of the behavioral model of therapy, for instance, and can be applied then to concerns around health. We know that stress does influence the course of disease. People may become sicker or may become more exaggerated in their illness as a result of the stress that they experience. And certain diseases, of course, are linked to stress, like hypertension, for example. So it's important then to manage.
Does age make it easier to deal with stress? The fact you've lived so many years and have fought many problems and solved many problems?
Well, you know, I think it does. I think that elderly people have less stress than younger people. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure if they cope better or they ignore it. And ignore their problems better, or that there are just fewer stresses in life that they have to cope with. But in general, it seems that they suffer less from the effects of stress. And when you ask them about how much stress do they have or how many worries in their lives, you get very few responses.
You use the term elderly. What time frame are you referring to? When does that begin?
Well, I think it actually begins around the age of 72 to 75. We use the term mainly to designate people over 65, though, but that's just, that was an arbitrary term established in Germany a long time ago, for whatever reason, for social reasons, I suppose, to make some cutoff point. But I think people actually begin to age seriously after the age of 72. People today are healthier at 65 than they were. 65 to 72 is still young,
and
or middle
after 80,
age.
very rapidly.
After 80, yes, you get very rapid declines in health.
What is the future of behavioral medicine?
Well, as I said, it originated in the mid-1970s. It's an area that is beginning to claim a great deal of federal funding, federal financing. federal money. It is being used more and more in health settings. Medical hospitals are incorporating psychologists into their treatment facilities in order to help them investigate the psychological aspects of disease. I think the field is going to snowball.
It'll take longer for a psychological treatment to be accepted than a medical treatment, medicine itself.
Well, I don't know. I think, well, for the elderly, they really don't seem to avail themselves of psychological services very much, whereas they feel they must go to a physician, although they don't even go to a physician as much as they should. So I think it's harder to sell to the elderly the use of psychological techniques, but when it's linked with medical practices, and if they can see that there can be a positive effect with the use of psychological techniques on their own health, I think it should be effective.
You're also involved in teaching those with aphasia to use sign language. Tell us what aphasia is.
Aphasia is a result of stroke that occurs on the left side of the brain that results in a loss of speech. People with aphasia, especially elderly people, have a great deal of problem communicating. Many times speech therapy services are not available to them, often because speech therapists feel that their time would be wasted with an elderly person, and because they have so many other cognitive deficits and other problems that accompany the speech loss. So they're left pretty much without a communication system. They can garble their words, they can make gestures, regular gestures, but pretty much they're left in isolation and silence.
Can they write?
Sometimes they can write, yeah. The other side wouldn't be affected. So if there's a left side, a left hemisphere lesion, then speech will be affected. But often that means still that the right side.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Okay, if there's a left side brain effect, then you have speech affected. And also means it affects the right side of the body, but you can still write with the other hand.
All right. How would you teach sign language to someone that can only use one hand?
With one hand. That's the purpose of this afternoon's workshop, is to talk about how we've modified sign language for the use of one hand. People in our program learned up to 40 signs just in a short period of time with one hand.
Dr. George Betts, Director and Coordinator of Gifted and Talented Education, University of Northern Colorado, visited the Burris Laboratory School at Ball State and visited the Gifted Child program and talked with us about the value of the gifted child. Dr. Betts, just visiting this class of kindergarten children is a delight to see the gifted child in action. This is a great national resource, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's one that we are just beginning to appreciate and understand that gifted children do need special attention. They need special services like our children in special education at the other end of the spectrum. And when we can start working with them at the preschool and the kindergarten level, it is going to be so much more rewarding for them as individuals and also for us as a society.
You've been here just a short time observing the Ball State University Burris Laboratory Gifted Child program. What are your observations?
Excitement. I have met now probably with about 25 of the different students, and I travel around the United States and met with many different students, and I'm very excited about their attitudes towards learning, the thinking that has taken place in a short time, in the dialogues I have had with them. They're on the right track. They're becoming independent, self-directed learners, and I think that's the goal. That is what we're trying to do, is not only teach our students content, but teach them how to think. And there were many examples of higher level thinking skills and curiosity and the ability to take a subject and go into depth into it. And these are the things that when I'm looking at a program I look for. And another thing I'm impressed with is the staff. I feel that there is a very facilitative staff, a staff that understands the gifted child and is producing an environment which is conducive to their growth, not only intellectually but emotionally and socially.
What happens to the gifted child that is neglected?
I think first of all they suffer from what is called the MOTS approach, M-O-T-S, more of the same. And the gifted child is a rapid learner. So they many times will finish early, and if they've done the odds, now they have to do the evens. And if they've still everyone else has not finished, then they still have to go on and do something else, and a third worksheet and a fourth. And one of the problems they face is boredom. And then another one is frustration. Frustration that they're learning differently. They have different learning styles. They think differently. And they're ready to go on to the next thing, and everyone else is still behind, and they become very frustrated. I think there's also a social isolation that comes with the giftedness, and it is more difficult for them to find true intellectual peers. That if you're in the 3rd grade and you spent the weekend with your parents studying astronomy, you're not going to come back and talk about, you won't believe the constellations I saw, when all of your friends are talking about, you know, some other topic. It's something that many times what they are doing intellectually will keep them from being able to really interact with other kids.
So, if they were in a class of gifted children, they could come back and relate these
Oh,
advanced
absolutely.
studies.
Yes. And many times, like today, an example was a 5th grader did a study on unicorns, and one of the kindergarten children came in and saw that and ran over to it and said, now I want to study that. That is neat. And 2 days later walked in here, dragging her mother, saying, here is the unicorns, and wanted to show the unicorns, and has this fascination. And will have the opportunity to study more about a topic that is pleasing to her, that catches hold of her eye, that, wow, I want to learn more about this.
Do programs for gifted children have to be expensive?
I'm not sure. The most important thing is the teacher as a facilitator that can allow and help the students to grow. We have so many different approaches that some have a great deal of money for, different activities and different materials. I would put my money more into working with the teachers and their training so that they understand gifted children. I haven't seen that the programs that we have had have been a lot more expensive. There is a cost involved, but if you look at gifted children as part of our, if not the most important concept of our national resources, our future depends on the creativity, the productive thinking of our youth. And the ones with the most potential here are our gifted and talented children.
The university had a proposal before the legislature this year that is not likely to pass to expand facilities for gifted children. Is this a problem that exists nationwide?
Yes, and it is a problem that in the last, since 1972 we have been facing. And many states are spending millions of dollars on programs, others are not. From the state I'm from, Colorado, we do not spend any additional funds, any funds whatsoever for gifted and talented children. And when I look at our programs in Colorado, we are more on the infancy stage than other states. There are states that do spend money, that have mandated programs. They have teacher recommendations and certifications, and will go beyond the provisional stage into a programmatic stage where it'll be something that will be as important as 3rd grade language arts. It'll be something that is a necessity for gifted children. Unfortunately, through the years, when there are budget cuts, one of the first things to go are the gifted programs. And so we, in our century, we have seen gifted programs come and go, and it's almost it's a curse and a blessing being gifted. You have these abilities, but it's going to be an uphill fight, upstream fight, in terms of developing all the potentials that you have.
Were you yourself a gifted child?
I was not recognized as one. I believe that, yes, I have many gifts and talents and areas that I have developed, but a lot of my development came from the home, It came from, I have two supportive parents that recognize some of my strengths. Although in school it was usually a conflict, and every year in the fall I would get comments such as, George does not listen to and follow directions. One time a comment, fourth grade, said, George is going to have to learn to control his emotional outburst. And part of my giftedness is my verbal ability and my ability to relate to other people. It was seen as a handicapping condition because I did not sit in the rows like I was supposed to.
Sir David Hunt, private secretary to Sir Winston Churchill, and Clement Attlee, while those gentlemen were prime ministers of Great Britain, at Ball State as the Sir Norman Angell lecturer, shared some of his personal and interesting observations of Sir Winston Churchill. In your opinion, Sir David, was Sir Winston Churchill as effective in his second term as Prime Minister in 1951 to 53 as the first time in office?
I think you mean was he physically as effective, because after all, in the first period of office there were great events going on, and the second was a period of moderately tranquil domestic administration. Well, as far as his physical capacity goes, he was, it seemed to me, perfectly capable right up to his first stroke, in you. After 53, he slowed down considerably. But from October 51, at the time he went back as Prime Minister in October 51, he was certainly perfectly effective and as hard-working and as worked as long hours as he ever did, and was as intellectually alert as he ever was.
In reading a brief biography of Churchill, they indicated that he had slowed down physically during that period, but not mentally.
Yes, I think that's fair, though he had never been all that active physically, even during the war.
He was pleased when his friend Dwight Eisenhower was elected president. Was this friendship reciprocated?
I think so. I believe so. I saw quite a lot of General Eisenhower during the war. I had always a good, very high opinion of him as a general, rather higher than most American critics of his generalship have. I don't know so much about him as a president. Yes, Churchill had a very sentimental regard for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower really, from all he said and the way he behaved, had a very sentimental and affectionate and respectful, I might almost say, regard for Churchill. It doesn't mean to say that he would alter American policies to want to win a smile from Churchill, if you put it that way.
What were Churchill's comments concerning Eisenhower? Can you recall any?
Yes, he thought that I can't recall any particular bon mot that he threw off or epigram, but he always spoke of him as a man with a very strong sense of duty, very capable of controlling events, and very good, of course, at managing a team.
How did he deal with Charles de Gaulle in France?
As carefully as he possibly could. He was always, his attitude towards de Gaulle was remarkably ambivalent. On the one hand, of course, it was he, Churchill, who had, as it were, given de Gaulle his start in life. He admired him immensely for having come out so uncompromisingly in June 1940. But of course he did think that he was an awkward customer to deal with, and so he was, and de Gaulle admitted it, and de Gaulle would say, I have to do this because if not I shall be regarded merely as a satellite of Britain. He had an respect for him. He admired very much his style. His style was good, of course.
He has been referred to as volatile and egocentric.
Then whoever referred to him in those terms picked two rather good ones, I think.
What was his relationship with Prime Minister Nehru of India?
Well, they were both old Harrovians. They'd been to school together. He, by the time, we're now talking about 51, when he came back as Prime Minister, by the time he went into his second Prime Ministership, the independence of India was already a fait accompli since 47. Churchill had, of course, fought against such a thing and had deplored it, but he was really very good in this way, that when things happened, then he would accept them and carry them off in a very good way. He, by then, by 51, he was prepared to admit that Nehru was a statesman with considerable powers of holding India together, which is one of the things that Churchill cared for, and that he was, in fact, a good Prime Minister of an independent country. And as it was independent, it was a good idea for us to be on friendly terms with it.
And he worked well with Churchill.
Yes, I can't think. Oh, Nehru, yes. He was rather pleased to be in the same game as Churchill. And his feelings towards the British were always very friendly. Nehru, I mean.
With the British Empire breaking apart after World War II and going in different directions, what were Churchill's comments as to the future of his country?
He thought that we had rather a good and strong future. You've got to remember, of course, that the main thing that had happened at that time was the independence of India, and of course the partition of India. That was the only real change, and you've got to remember that this was the fulfillment of a policy to which Churchill himself had, in the past, subscribed. He, as you know very well, he would have preferred to have delayed such a thing. He was one of those people who thought it was never quite opportune for India to get its independence within the Commonwealth. But he was among those who would assert at all times quite firmly that, yes, of course, our aim in India is to create a fine, strong, independent country, which in due course will be as independent of us as Canada is, and so on. And so, although he might not have approved of the speed with which it had come about, or the way in which it was done, for that matter, when it was there, it was a fact of life and something which did represent the fulfillment of British past aspirations. It was not, of course, until later, beginning in 57, that you had the independence of the colonial empire in Africa, when the breakup of the independence of Africa began. And he did live to see it, but he was out of power long before.
Following his retirement, did you have a working contact with him?
Well, not working. I used to see him from time to time at Chartwell, and on occasions in London. He often came to Number 10 for parties, for commemorations of some event or another.
And you, of course, were there with Clement Attlee.
I would stay with, yes, I would often be there, yes.
Yes. Did Clement Attlee confer with Sir Winston, and did other?
Oh, no, wait. Attlee, of course, was immediately before Churchill. Attlee was a man, he had a great admiration for Churchill. He had admired him very much in the First World War, and thought that Winston was the only man who had a sensible idea, which was the idea of the Dardanelles. Party leaders in our system do confer quite a lot, all the time, to arrange smoothly parliamentary business and so on. And the two of them were on excellent terms. Churchill had a great admiration for Attlee. People tried to write down Attlee a great deal too much. They used to tell stories about Attlee to his discredit. You know, he was a very modest little man with a great deal to be modest about. And then there was a story which says, an empty taxi cab drove up outside Number 10 and Mr. Attlee got out. Now that one was attributed to Churchill, and when a friend of his, Jock Colville, challenged him on it, he says, I've just been reading his memoirs, his face went quite dark, very, very dark, and he said most sternly, Mr. Attlee is a patriotic and honourable gentleman for whom I have the highest regard. I would never dream, he has served his country well in both world wars, which is one of the things that Churchill liked, because Attlee was a regimental officer in the First World War, very like Harry Truman. And he said, I never said such a thing, and if anyone attributes it to me, you should deny it at once, or what's that thing.
Would you care to compare the two prime ministers?
Yes, I would. As a matter of fact, when Churchill took over from Attlee, I was very much I had rather a party piece comparing the two, because I used to say, oh, tremendous contrast, of course, tremendous contrast. One of them very decisive, look at a piece of paper and say, yes, very good, certainly, and carry on to the next one. And the other one always saying, well, no, I'll wait a bit and we'll look at that later, or bring it down to Churchill. Now, when I said Churchill, which was Churchill's private home, you see, there'd be a double take, because they'd been nodding their heads hitherto and saying, yes, I thought it was like that, how terrible it was. And then they suddenly realized that the decisive one was Attlee, and the one who liked to procrastinate was Churchill. And this is perfectly true. Attlee was a man with a remarkable gift for taking rapid decisions. And Churchill liked, on the other hand, and also Attlee was very much more in control of his cabinet than Churchill was. He didn't let them talk too much. He shut them up. He'd tell them what they got to think. Very good, too. I mean, all in the sort of democratic tradition, but nevertheless, he was much in control. Churchill was less in control of his cabinet. But, you know, it all came to the same thing in the end, because it's a good thing anyway, as Churchill used to do, to get other opinions and think things over. There are very few things in this life, perhaps sometimes in war, but otherwise there are very few things in this life that need to be decided just like that, bang. It's very convenient, of course, the Attlee method for the civil servant, because then the job is done and then go on to the next.
Did Churchill ever discuss mistakes that he may have made in the decision-making process and changes that he would like to have made if he had another opportunity?
Well, no, let me see. Well, I think I can think of one, anyway. I remember him saying to me, because I'd served on the staff of Lord Alexander in the Mediterranean. He was the Allied Supreme Commander in the Mediterranean. And Churchill knew this, and Churchill thought Alexander was far the best of all the British generals. And he said, I think the great mistake we made, the Allies, it was Roosevelt and I, was not to have backed his campaign in Italy more, so that he could have swept on into Eastern Central Europe, into Hungary and Austria, and arrived there before the Russians. I think that was the greatest mistake we made in the war. So that's one case I can think of anyway.
What influence did Lady Churchill exert on her husband?
Oh, very great influence indeed. She was a splendid woman. It's very difficult to find anything nasty to say of her. She was a little quick-tempered, perhaps, but in a rather pleasant way. She influenced him very strongly. He depended on her opinion. Whenever he didn't take it, he went wrong. This had happened I can't think of any case in my time, but in the past he'd certainly gone wrong through not listening to what she was saying. And she was sweet. She didn't like anything nasty about anybody. I remember very well, for example, at one lunch at Chequers when Field Marshal Montgomery was there, and he was lunching, and he was abusing and telling scandalous stories about someone. I think he did it because he thought it would please Churchill, because he thought Churchill was going to sack the man. As a matter of fact, he wasn't going to sack him, and I knew that. I knew that he wasn't. And I was seeing Montgomery floundering away. But the point is, Clemmy, she said, he was going on saying, oh, Monty, oh, you can't mean that. You don't really mean that, do you? Oh, yes, absolute fact, I tell you. There's all these Chinese girls and so on. And he said, oh, nonsense, Monty, you don't mean that. Yes, perfectly true, I'm afraid. But then he began to be a bit worried, because Churchill was simply saying, humph, that sort of thing. Well, what do you think? Do you think a man like that can keep his job? You know, Prime Minister? Humph, that sort of thing. And I was enjoying it because, as I say, I knew the man wasn't going to be sacked, but in fact was regarded with, now, with some favour by Churchill. He had been not, but there'd been a sudden change. Sorry, I can't be more explicit because it's rather a scandalous story.
Furnishings for this program provided by Van Tassel's Fireside Furniture and Clock Gallery, 5000 Kilgore, Muncie, Indiana.